The second half of Ursula K. Leguin's short story On the High Marsh, found in her Tales from Earthsea, concerns this character Irioth, as did the first half, but now we get to find out who and what he is, or rather was, and who he will become. And this happens because we now have a new character coming in. Previously we had Irioth, who's rather confused, seems to be very talented and knowledgeable, but also a bit fuzzy-headed. We have Gift, or Emer. Gift is her use name. Emer is her true name. A widow who has taken him in and who's taking care of him as well. And now we get a third important person coming into the mix. And we're told Sunbright, the sorcerer, the village sorcerer, filled with jealousy, who Irioth had almost attacked and then fell down in a fit in front of, had not been gone 3 years when a new stranger appeared in town, a man riding up the south road on a good horse, asking at the tavern for lodging. They sent him to Sand's house. Sand's wife screeched when he heard it was a stranger at the door, and so they sent him up the way to Gift's house. Send him out on the dairy, said one of Alder's cowboys. Gift's taking whatever comes. And then the taverner says, all the foreigners in one basket. And this was repeated that night at the tavern several dozen times. An inexhaustible source of admiration, the best thing anyone had said since the Murren. This is the kind of small town mentality, right? And as it turns out, who is this stranger? It's Ged, the archmage of Earthsea. Gift is in the dairy, and Ged comes saying, I'm looking for a bed for the night. And then she says, well, I'm full up. And he says, that's okay, I'll sleep in the cow barn. You know, it's a good place for me to be. And he calls himself Master Hawk. She says, I'm Gift. Put your horse up and see to him. There's the pump. Come in the house after. I can give you a bit of milk soup, and a penny will be more than enough. Thank you. And so he's there, squatting on the hearth, making up the fire. The curer was in his room asleep. She looked in and closed the door. He's not too well, she said, speaking low. He was curing the cattle away out east over the marsh in the cold for days on end, and he wore himself out. And they talk a little bit about that. And she also talks about the other sorcerer who wasn't any good. He did no good to my cow with the cake bag 2 years ago. His balm's just pig fat, I'd swear. And then Hawk says, Mistress, may I tell you a story? And she says, oh, are you a teller? Why didn't you say so to begin with? Is that what you are then? I wondered, it being winter and all, and you being on the roads. But with a horse, I thought you might be a merchant. Can you tell me a story? It would be the joy of my life, and the longer the better. But drink your soup first and let me sit down to hear. And he says, I'm not truly a teller, mistress. And a little bit later, he's going to say, now this is not a story for you to spread around, but I'm going to tell you a story. And it quickly becomes apparent who this story is about. First, he tells her about Roke. In the inmost sea, on the Isle of the Wise, on Roke Island, where all magery is taught, there are 9 masters. He named the masters Hand and Herbal, Summoner and Patterner, Wind Key Enchanter, the Namer and the Changer. The Changers and the Summoners are very perilous arts, he said. Changing or transformation you maybe know of, mistress. Even a common sorcerer may know how to work illusion changes. Have you seen that? And then he talks about bringing the dead back, and that is summoning. Naming truly a great power. To know the true name is to have power, as you know, mistress, and the summoner's art goes straight to that. It's a wonderful thing to summon up the semblance and spirit of one long dead. And then he says, well, to my story. 40 years and more ago, there was a child born on the Isle of Ark. This child was the son of an under-steward. The parents died young. Not much heed was paid to them till they began to take notice of him because of what he did and could do. He was an uncanny brat, as they said. He had powers. He could light a fire or douse it with a word. He could make pots and pans fly through the air. And what they do, instead of taking care of him, is they bind him. They try to prevent him from using his powers. Nobody teaches him. He was only a child, and the wizards of that household can't have been wise men, for they used little wisdom or gentleness with him. Maybe they were afraid of him. They bound his hands and gagged his mouth to keep him from making spells. They locked him in a cellar room, in a room of stone, till they thought him tamed. They sent him away to live at the stables of the great farm, for he had a hand with the animals and was quieter when he was with the horses. But he quarreled with a stable boy and turned the poor lad into a lump of dung. When the wizards had got the stable boy back into his own shape, they tied him up again, gagged his mouth, and put him on a ship for Roke. They thought maybe the masters there could tame him. So they are already adopting the wrong way to deal with this unruly child. They send him to Roke, and at Roke, the masters do their best. They didn't punish him, but they kept his wild powers bound with spells until they could make him listen and begin to learn. Why? There was a rivalrous spirit in him that made him look on any power he did not have, anything he did not know, as a threat, a challenge, a thing to fight against until he could defeat it. There are many boys like that. I was one, but I was lucky I learned my lesson young. There are many people like that in the world, are there not, who see any challenge, any opposition as a threat that then has to be mastered, has to be dominated, has to be crushed, has to be put down. And so even trying to keep that within limits is difficult, because as you're guiding somebody like that, they can see your guidance, let alone your binding, as a way of trying to control them. They view the world in a very, what would we say, a very zero-sum sort of way. Somebody has to be in charge. It may as well be me. And so they do manage to get him to start paying attention and to learning, and he's a very strong learner, and he decides that he's going to go to the art that is one of the greatest of all, that of summoning. And here is where things start to really go awry. What is forbidden to the summoner or any wizard is to call a living spirit. We can call to them. We can send to them a voice or presentiment, a seeming of ourself, but we don't summon them in spirit or flesh to come to us. Only the dead may we summon, only the shadows. To summon a living man is to have entire power over him, body or mind. So it can be done, but here's the next line that's very important. No one, no matter how strong or wise or great, can rightly own and use another. Now, that doesn't mean that one can't own and use another. The rightly is the key thing there. It will always be damaging. It will always be wrong. It will always generate evil in doing this. This young man decides that there was no place for him among the masters, since a new master summoner had been chosen. Among the scholars and other teachers, he had a place of honor, but he wasn't one of the 9. He'd been passed over. Maybe it wasn't a good thing for him to stay there, always among wizards and mages. So he began to practice certain arts that are not well to practice and lead to no good things. A summoner grows used to bidding spirits and shadows to come to his will and go at his word. Maybe this man began to think, who's to forbid me from doing the same with the living? Why have I the power if I cannot use it? So he began to call the living to him, those at Roke who he feared, thinking them rivals, those whose power he was jealous of. When he came to them, he took their power from them for himself, leaving them silent. They couldn't say what had happened to them, what had become of their power. They didn't know. And then eventually, he decides to take a drastic step. He summons his own master, the summoner of Roke, taking him unawares. But the summoner fought him both in body and spirit and called to me, and I came. Together we fought against the will that would destroy us. So it's really 2 of the most powerful mages in Earthsea, now in tandem against this other young mage who's also quite powerful, the summoner and the archmage. They beat him off. They drive him off, and he flees from the Isle of Roke, and he's damaged in the process. He was half mad, as Ged says. Now he became fully mad. And then Ged thought to himself, it's probably not a good thing to have a man of very great power, a mage, wandering about Earthsea, not in his right mind, maybe full of shame and rage and vengefulness. We'd better track this guy down. We'd better figure out what became of him. And this is where we find out this is the man. Irioth was that person. The guy sleeping, having healed all those cattle in the other room in Gift's cottage, is this great mage. And the person sitting in front of her is the archmage of Earthsea. And Irioth comes out. He calls him there. She looked at the door of the bedroom and opened, and he stood there thin and tired, his dark eyes full of sleep and bewilderment and pain. Ged, he bowed his head, will you take my name from me? So Irioth is making a request of Ged. He knows that he should be punished in some way. Something should be done to him. He's gained a certain kind of wisdom. And Ged says, why should I do that? He says, my name means only hurt, hate, pride, greed. Ged says, I'll take those names from you, Irioth, but not your own. And then Irioth says something very important that shows that he's learned something all too late along the way. I didn't understand about the others that they are other. We are all other. We must be. I was wrong. Now, that sounds rather confusing, but what is he actually saying there? He wasn't able to recognize you might say, the legitimate reality, the dignity of other people, that they really do matter, that they're not just there to oppress him and bind him and as a force to be fought against and to master in his own right. Rather, they are something to be dealt with in other ways, that we're all like that. He now understands this, and this is a very important lesson. Ged says, you went wrong, you've come back, but you're tired, Irioth, and the way is hard when you go alone. And now Ged suggests to him, come home with me, come back to Roke. We'll let you back in. We're not going to take vengeance upon you. We'll try to undo whatever damage has still, lasted up to this time, but we're not going to hurt you. And Irioth says, I have work here. Ged looked at her, at Gift. He does, she said. He heals the cattle. Irioth says, they show me what I should do and who I am. They know my name, but they never say it. And then we see Ged being tender with Irioth. After a while, Ged gently drew the older man to him and held him in his arms. He said something quietly to him and let him go. Irioth drew a great breath. I'm no good there at Roke, you see, Ged. I am here if they'll let me do the work. He's found a place for himself to exercise his talents. He looked again at Gift, and Ged did also. She looked at them both. And this is very important. All three characters are coming to an understanding about the life going forward. And it's not just a life for Irioth, because Gift, or Emer, she's somebody who has also been looking for something, who needs something in her own life. The life that is going to be lived now is not just one for a solitary mage, Irioth. It's one with Emer. Ged says, what say you, Emer? I'd say, she said, her voice thin and reedy, speaking to the cure, that if Alder's beeves stay afoot through the winter, the cattlemen will be begging you to stay, though they may not love you. Nobody loves a sorcerer, said the archmage. Well, Irioth, did I come all this way for you in the dead of winter and must go back alone? And Irioth says, tell them I was wrong, tell them I did wrong. And Ged says, I'll tell them that the changes in a man's life may be beyond all the arts we know and all our wisdom. And then Ged says, may he stay here, mistress. Is it your wish as well as his? And she says, he's 10 times the use and company to me, my brother is, and a kind, true man, as I told you, sir. And then Ged says goodbye. Very well then, Irioth, my dear companion, teacher, rival, friend, farewell. Emer, brave woman, my honor and thanks to you. May your heart and hearth know peace. And he made a gesture that left a glittering track between it, a moment in the air above the hearthstone. Now I'm off to the cow barn. So Ged is giving them not just a blessing, but a magical blessing as well. And they have made a decision about how things are going to stand. Come to the fire, she says to Irioth. And she asks, was that the archmage truly? The archmage of the world in my cow barn. He should have my bed. He won't, said Irioth. She knew he was right. And here's how it ends, with a kind of redemption at a personal level, where it really does matter. Your name is beautiful, Irioth, she said after a while. I never knew my husband's true name, nor he mine. I won't speak yours again, but I like to know it since you know mine. Your name is beautiful, Emer, he said. I will speak it when you tell me to. So there's an intimacy between them that she didn't enjoy even with her own husband. And that is where things are left for the mage Irioth. Still half mad, still not entirely put together, but now at least knowing his place and having said what it is that he did, coming to terms with it, and having been, in a certain way, forgiven by Ged on behalf of Roke.